Hello everyone, welcome to Propane Fitness Podcast episode 24. Johnny isn't here today. The topic of today's podcast is flexibility, and Johnny just felt too intimidated because he's not flexible. He's actually doing a client video call, but anyway, we are here today with Emmet Louis, who is an acrobatic and movement specialist. Recently, I've changed my training focus much more towards gymnastics and acrobatics and trying to improve my flexibility, and I came across Emmet through a couple of mutual friends, as well as just having an absolute binge of his YouTube channel. All of the stuff that he gets across is really accessible. He's got a good grounding in the theory of strength and training, and the main thing that really attracted us to him is primarily his beard. So he's an empirically focused guy so hi Emmet.
Hey, how's it going? Thanks for having me. It's an honor, as I said earlier. Just quite a big guest list to live up to, so hopefully I can do guys answer some questions and help your listeners.
Hopefully, yeah. So can you tell us a bit about yourself, about your history?
So the short story was, I'll give you a short story anyway. So I've always been quite active in extreme sports, bit of gymnastics and acrobatics in school, but not at competition level. It was just basically, instead of PE, we had one of the teachers was gymnastics coach, so we do gymnastics. The other one we do kicking footballs around, shit like that. So nothing major. Then as I progressed now, I got interested in performing. I was performing in nightclubs, doing circus, things like that. Then I decided that was about age 18. Then I went on, done a degree in, first I done circus media in Bristol. Then I went on to Circus Space in London, which is now National Centre of Circus Arts. And then from there I was performing for a few years afterwards. Then I had an injury and basically shifted my focus to coaching because I couldn't keep up with the performance schedule. Then in terms of how I developed as a coach, I was always a bit behind my peers in terms of skill level. I wasn't an elite level gymnast. I'm not from Eastern Europe where they're just whipped into shape from quite a young age. So I was always researching training, even back in the day, just trying to find out, what can I find to make myself better, what is good, what doesn't work. So from that I began to, say age 18, I was devouring T-Nation, people knock on T-Nation, but I think it gave me so many starts, and I'm quite academically focused. I'll sort of go and I'll buy books, or even back then, so then I'd find all these starting points from T-Nation, say, and then I'd lead on from there, see what worked, see what didn't work, and then sort of I'd slowly get more and more people coming to me asking me for questions. And then with the sort of growth of this movement thing, I was working as a normal personal trainer after my injury, but then I had more and more people who were coming just to seek me out because they knew he's got this knowledge base that we're now interested in. So it's kind of interesting just how it's kind of exploded over the last few years. I never expected anything to get as big as it's getting. But
that sounds very similar to us. I think T-Nation was almost the death of us, in that we probably spent about 2-3 years getting what we like to call bogged down in thinking that if the reason for our lack of progress was that our casein wasn't hydrolyzed enough, and that the multi-chain cyclical dextrose wasn't quite timed correctly with our workouts and stuff. But it's certainly there was some good content on there as well, aside from the supplement pitches.
We need the supplements, and I need this one. I discovered if you take enough hot rocks, it's like taking a rap of speed.
Terrifying.
Disadvantages of the youth, but whatever happens. But no, I think there's a lot of good information on T-Nation, and they do try to oversell you supplements and men's nipples, but
I suppose they've got to make a living. But there we go. Who do you primarily work with now?
Primarily, it's really weird. So when, say, I was just personal training, I was split my time. I train circus people, so just people from circus, either acrobatics, different disciplines, looking just to enhance what would be now called movement. So I don't really coach any specific discipline, but I'll just be trying to correct imbalances, fix their flexibility, get them to the next level of what they're doing. So I'd be taking a more general approach to their body, whereas their specific coach would be working, we're going to make you good on rope. So I'm just going to go, what makes a good rope artist? What makes this? Let's find those qualities you're missing, put them in your body. Then, as this with the growth of CrossFit more than anything else was the first sort of kick of this. I had a lot of CrossFitters coming like, oh, we want to learn how to do muscle ups or bar muscle ups, these gymnastic skills, L-sits, because what they were doing in the CrossFit class just wasn't working for them. So that was kind of the first foray into the movement world. But now it's just been more and more people are just seeking me out.
Right.
And then in turn, I started putting the videos on YouTube more just to answer questions that I was getting a lot. So then it's just getting those questions, and then it's just grown and grown, and it's just like, I basically had to quit. I only take on few people in person now, so that size of my business, I got rid of all the normal personal training things a couple of years ago. I just deal with special cases, which is quite interesting.
That's cool. I think the quality is clearly showing through in the material you put out, and I'd put money on within a couple of years your exposure, your subscriber base is gonna be growing pretty rapidly. So it's really good to see. You mentioned that you had an injury that put you out for a while, and I saw that you fractured your trapezius?
I broke my trapezium in my wrist. For those who don't know, it's one of the metacarpals just below the base of the thumb. Now, I've done that. I landed on a half pipe wrong and just broke it. It's one of the rarest fractures you can do in a wrist. A risky rare fracture. But it basically, the trapezium broke in half, and half of it died off because I had no blood supply. So for what is an incredibly tiny bone in your body, it was causing me a lot of pain. I couldn't weight bear, I couldn't grip strong. So for about 2 years, I was unable to train bar maybe once a week just to sort of keep a small base level of strength. The rest of the time, push-ups were out, even push-ups with parallel bars.
Oh man.
Slowly, I couldn't even flex my wrist or extend my wrist, stuck to about this level. Seen specialists with no help, so I ended up just doing a lot of research, applying my own stuff, and I've essentially rebuilt the joint now to the point that I can go back to practicing one-arm handstands, muscle ups, ring works,
That's fantastic. Yeah, that sounds like it really sucks then if you didn't even have full extension of your wrist. That's something that, even in just sort of daily life, standing up from a chair and things must have been.
Yeah, chairs and opening doors are the ones that will get you, because you just don't think, you're just walking and then boom, and then your wrist doesn't bend, your fingers will go back, and the unexpected things. So you're just like, fuck, just holding your wrist walking down the stairs. And
yeah, horrendous. I was going to ask you something about injury a bit later on, but I do find, at least I've seen some data as well suggesting that people start developing really funky sort of compensatory movement patterns when they have an injury, and often once they're recovered doesn't really come back.
Definitely, it's one of these things that our body is our mind is our body to a certain degree, and we inhabit the patterns we do. So if our brain senses pain, even at a very subconscious level, or knows that if I do an action it's going to hurt, same as if we feed a dog but the food bowl is electrified, he's not going to go for the food bowl from the red bowl, he'll go from different one. So if you know there's that negative stimulus, then you will just begin to lean away, or you'll do funky things. Like if we look at someone who has bad ankle injuries, they'll lock their joints on one side to keep the weight going through the bones rather than having to balance it and potentially risk controlling that leg in a weird position.
Right.
So if you rebuild something, people will still have this funky pattern going on, as you put it.
So that's going to have some kind of cascade of muscular effects, I'm sure.
Yeah.
On the rest of their body up the stream, I guess.
Basically, and it's a lot of unconscious tension, what I kind of touched on in one of the other videos, that we can hold a lot of tension in our body, and that's basically our compensating pattern. It hurts when I put all the weight on my foot because I sprained my ankle all those years ago, and then we're just consciously keeping all our weight to one side would be a simple example of that.
Right.
And we don't know that, and we think we're aligned, we think we're balanced, but if we stuck someone on pressure plate, we'll see they've got 75% of their weight on their one leg and 25 on the other.
Wow.
And all the way through their life, or until we sort of point this thing out. Amazing
that's something that you wouldn't be aware of until you just stand on the thing and you're like, oh, That's quite a major shift. That actually segues us quite nicely into. So I was going to ask you. Our audience tend to be lifters, primarily trying to get stronger or leaner, and we have a lot of power lifters and some Olympic lifters as well. So one thing that it's a problem that I've had, and I imagine it's a very common one with lifters, particularly in the sense that all of the main lifts that we're doing involve kind of being in this lumbar extension position, anterior pelvic tilt, so the squats, deadlift, cleans, all of that, where you're really in a very posterior chain dominant position. And what happened is I tore my quadratus lumborum, which is one of the spinal erectors, and part of the core anyway, and that's caused me chronic back pain for about 7 years or so. And after doing some reading, I'm starting to realize that it's most likely there's not any kind of structural damage remaining in that area anymore, but it's more about the threat perception and the kind of fear of going through flexion. And I think that's partly been, although I hate the term, the biopsychosocial model to pain, that there probably is a psychological element in that, particularly things like T Nation, as we mentioned, tend to really demonize spinal flexion as if it's the worst thing in the world, whereas I think that's really come about through some kind of exaggeration of don't flex your spine maximally under load, but then people kind of extrapolated that to take it as never flex your spine. So do you have anything to say about improving that, or if you have anyone who does have like flexion intolerant back pain, and how they can eventually learn to kind of start safely moving through that motion once again?
First things first, we have to. It's one thing, QL tear, just to address, actually is quite common. I've come across that with a lot. A lot of people from a lot of backgrounds actually have it. Now, my guess to what the cause of this, and something you might want to investigate in your own training, is the QL isn't that active when you're loaded in a symmetric manner, but it does a lot of the lateral flexion of the spine from side to side and stabilizes that. So if we were to look at offset carries, so one-handed farmer's walks, farm kettlebell or dumbbell in a front rack position walks, even taking overhead walks with one arm loaded lunges, one arm loaded Bulgarian split squats, we can look at actually strengthening the QL, because if something's going to go in the body, it's the weak link, obviously. So if that's not getting trained and not keeping up with the rest of your strength, that will be the first thing to go, particularly if you know, one leg is stronger than the other. We're going to come up uneven slightly on a max deadlift. It happens unless you're, trained very, very strongly. So you will be in a bad position. So that's something just to think about in accessory work.
Okay.
It's also another thing I train a few powerlifters here and there. And something to investigate for your powerlifting audience is your hip flexors. So many powerlifters' hip flexors are weak, which is contrary to the thing, because no one really thinks we're sitting in a flex position, they're inhibited. A little test you guys might want to try is stand with your back against the wall, about 1 inch, 2 inches from the wall. So you're not touching it, but you just can't lean backwards. Now I want you to lift your leg up into roughly the same position your squat stance is. So breaking parallel, knee above the hip crease. And you should be able to hold that for a minimum of 15 seconds without any gritting of the teeth, relaxed face, no shaking.
I can see myself embarrassingly failing at this.
If you can't do that, your hip flexors are weak. Now, that's going to also tug on the other side of the spine. It'll also affect your start position in a lot of lifts. That's one thing that I've noticed such a massive change in. I think there's some pictures on my Facebook of one of the guys who done one of my flexibility workshops, and I pointed out that his hip flexors were weak. So he done some work to strengthen them. Sent me a photo in 4 weeks' time of his deadlift start position. Had gone from having a curved lumbar spine to being perfectly flat in the lumbar spine, and then rounded over a bit in the thoracic, which is fine if you're doing a heavy deadlift.
Right, that's fun. So he changed his start position from not even from addressing something sort of further down the chain.
Yeah, from looking at the psoas, it's just basically getting that balance, because if we think what's happening, we're coming forward, but if we go forward, if the psoas doesn't pull this way, it's not going to engage the spine properly. It's part of that stabilization. It's the only thing that attaches the legs to the torso. essentially. It's the direct line from the legs to the spine. So if the psoas or the hip flexors are weak, then your start position, your flexed hip position might be weak as well.
So that was something that I heard Kit Lachlan talk about, where he said that a lot of people can't actually access their psoas in a stretch because of their rectus femoris is the limiting factor. It's so crap that that's the thing that they need to release first. What would you recommend for that?
I'd agree with that. So personally, Kit Lachlan is quite a mentor to me, and he's been quite a good friend and give me a lot of advice. I've done training with him, and I'd agree that the stretch therapy hip flexor practice is one of the most potent release sequences for the hip flexors. You can find them on his YouTube. I think he has them on pay-per-view on Vimeo for a $5, which is worth investing. But in terms of what's going is the psoas release. We need to release, rec fem is one of the hip flexors. The psoas, we need to clear all the tension from that. Now we can mimic the effect of that. The problem is most people in all their hip extension stretches, so thinking couch stretch for most people would be familiar with that. Most people will be familiar with the wall quad stretch or just even the kneeling lunge. No one is posteriorly tilting their pelvis maximally before engaging that stretch. So you need to tilt. For guys, the best image you can think of, and girls maybe if you can picture that, if you're standing in front of a table, you want to try and put your balls on the table. that amount of tuck. And then once you have that tuck, only going as far into the stretch as you can maintain it. And that will actually open hip extension. Whereas if you flex the hip, even a small amount, you lose that control. You just don't actually, you'll get a bit of a stretch, but you're not actually stretching anything that's crossing the hip or teaching it to extend. A lot of the time it's just teaching it to release and extend more than actually trying to make it longer.
Right. So balls on the table.
Balls on the table, that image, like that kind of tuck of the pelvis as much as you can. If you're tight there, if you're inhibited, it's not going to go too far. You just need to get in there, make it do it. You can make your body do whatever you want if you focus hard enough and spend enough time practicing it. But literally it's that whole tucking the tail motion and then doing your quad stretches, your hip flexor stretches, what make them potent.
Right.
And then holding them for long enough time as well. A lot of people just don't hold their stretches long enough.
So how long would you say to hold something for?
Now it depends. So we can obviously apply all these fancy PNF techniques, contract, relax, breathe, release, pulsing, all this shit, that's fine. But even just getting in, if people just want to do the simplest thing, holding your stretches for 90 seconds to 120 seconds at a level that you can bear, and kind of just breathing, try to focus on the breathing, relaxing your face. Relax, go further, relax, go further, every 15, 20 seconds. Don't go too far into the pain zone, because once you start tensing your face, back off a little. That will do a lot. Then we can start looking at all the fancier stuff. But just clearing out that tension that we're just holding, just unconsciously, just put a bit of tension in, just forces those muscles to basically just relax, go further. And that will do a lot.
Sure. So, 90 to 120 seconds certainly, especially when you're in a stretch, I think it goes a lot slower than a lot of people think. And we've certainly had people that, and myself included, being in a stretch for what feels like ages, and then you look at the clock and it's like 15 seconds. So, I guess it's probably quite important. Do you time these stretches? Do you have a stopwatch or something, or do you just sit and count them?
Stopwatch. So it's kind of one of the differences between me and Kit would be Kit Lachlan kind of just teaches people to inhabit their body and feel it out. I'm more of a thing, particularly with beginners, just to give them a set time, but with clear goals of just breathe, relax, breathe, relax. Obviously, when I'm working with people, I might back them out or might let them go a bit further if they need it, judging on how they're reacting. You don't want to get to the point where you're, like, for a lot of people in a lot of stretch positions, you're quite weak. So you want to take a lot of the weight, If you can get there with 10 kilos of weight, of your body weight, and hold the other 80 kilos in, a chair or some yoga blocks, whatever, that's fine. You can still increase on that. Whereas if you don't put body weight into it, it becomes unbearable and you can't maintain it.
Well, just while we're on that note, if it's all right, if we can just back up a little bit and just kind of go over what's your definition of flexibility, and if you can clear up the kind of misconception and any misconceptions on flexibility versus mobility.
Oh, we're getting into a fucking shitstorm now.
Oh, really? Okay, you might get a lot of haters coming back
I
to
can
you.
give my take on it, and for me, mobility and flexibility training they're always linked. There's no separation. If we look at what we've done in dance classes, if we look at what we do in gymnastics, even though there's thing, you're training flexibility, your mobility is also trained in your specific activity. But nowadays it's kind of like I'm doing mobility, I'm doing this. If we look at like the most flexible people, go back to gymnasts and dancers, yeah, they're doing their stretches, but they're also moving in much more directions than anyone else and much more often. And that's kind of, they're using their flexibility, and that's what's integrating it. Now we can begin to try and replicate that in terms of gaining motor control, practice like that. But if you use it, then it begins to integrate. Now, in terms of mobility, it's a bit of a catch-all term. Like, I haven't really got one definition of it, so I can't really, because I don't believe there is one definition, because it's not specific. You know, what's mobile for a powerlifter, you know, if we're talking about your audience, is completely different than what's mobile for a dancer. So, it's
agreed. I think also people often conflate mobility with soft tissue work, and I guess they just kind of use the word mobility to mean rolling around on the mat and just doing that weird stuff before you go and squat. So I think it's got a very kind of fuzzy definition. But what you said there, I think, is really key, and it is something that is what triggered me to just go on the Emmet binge, which is saying that in relation to gymnasts being stronger in a certain position and through a range of motion, and how you were saying that you kind of you define flexibility in one of your videos as the strength in a position, and saying how it's not to do with the actual length of the contractile tissues or the fascia or anything, that it's just about almost the threat perception in that position and learning to move through it consciously. So for me that was huge shift.
Yeah, it's definitely like just teaching the body, as you said, threat perception, of teaching the body that it's okay to go into these ranges. I was just talking about this today actually in regards to side splits. So I basically approach side splits from, anyone knows it, from basic strength in that stretch position. Same with front splits as well, but just keep it side splits. So there's a couple of different routes we can take to achieve the side split. But what I've noticed with most of my clients and students, they'll go out, they'll sort of hit a plateau at maybe 160 degrees of legs apart, maybe 150. They'll build up a lot of strength there. And then just one day, they'll just be like, they'll say to me, oh, I think I can do splits today. Or they'll change. Now, it might plateau for 6 weeks, or some people will just go straight flat linearly. But then just one day, there's something changes in their brain. Or maybe their body goes, okay, I can do the split now, and they know it internally. But then they can just go completely flat, and it's like, you know, it makes me look like a miracle worker because I was saying this, but it's basically something has happened in either that link. Maybe the brain now knows, oh, hold on, I have all this strength, but I can hold it. Now I can just relax and go further into this thing, and it's not a threat. Or, you know, the body just goes, okay, finally realize, fuck it, we have all the tissue quality we need. Let's tell the brain it's okay to go there.
Right. So, well, I suppose that's kind of the logical answer to my next question, which was going to be, why is flexibility important for the average Joe, and then for someone who is training for strength or hypertrophy? But yeah, I guess you've kind of answered that already.
Yeah, I can diverge on that one just in terms of, you have to look at what you're doing for the activity. Now, I know movement is one of the big things at the moment, that's kind of one of my focuses. But at the end of the day, if you guys are, say, powerlifting, for example, now you want to spend as much of your training energy. We only have a certain amount of energy to spend on training a week, be that, you know, making our food, doing our mobility, whatever the fuck it is you need to do to be a successful powerlifter. But so you need to choose what flexibility methods are going to benefit me the most. Now, we know if we work through full range of motion and we add some pauses in our reps. So if we were to look at our accessory exercises, say we had tight pecs. Now, if we were to do as an accessory exercise, dumbbell pressing, inclined dumbbell pressing, where you go into a stretch position and pause it in those reps, we'd achieve our stretching and our mobility goals a lot of the time. And we'd also work on our quality, spend a lot of our training effort building our pecs, say, which will in turn transfer to our speed off our chest, if I'm getting that right on benching. But it's the same with, okay, or say our calves are tight or we can't squat ass to grass. Maybe if we chose a front foot elevated split squat to start with, and then we just focus on not just going straight down, but also sending the knee forward and replicating the squatting alignment on one leg, we'll also just speed up the process of gaining our ass to grass squat in a way that's also, we're training our legs, we're spending some time, so our mobility training, our strength training is quite linked. Now, for someone who does acrobatics or gymnastics and stuff we're doing, we're looking at more extreme positions, but there's no reason we can't use the same techniques for powerlifting.
Sure. So basically, graduate through the movements rather than kind of, I guess, expecting someone to be able to hit a full squat from, if they have or if they're not anatomically built for it, then to kind of pick a movement that they can move through that range of motion, maybe pause at the bottom, get comfortable in that, and build some strength in those extreme ends of the range of motion before progressing.
Yeah, exactly. And we can and then we can also, it doesn't take too much out of our training time. It's one of those things when I'm dealing with my clients and students, obviously a lot of them are looking for higher levels of flexibility, but we don't do that much what they think is stretching. And they're always, when they see the programs, they're like, we're not doing that much stretching. I was like, just give it 6 weeks and then we'll see where you are.
Right, I see. So, well, I guess it's probably a false economy to think like, oh, well, I have to go for specificity and I've got to just keep hammering the squat even though I can't hit my positions properly. Whereas actually, if they did take a couple of steps back and work the positions and get stronger in them, I imagine it would then put more kilos on the bar as well.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a lot of the benefits of, we can say a high step up, or quite a high step. We can replicate the benefits of an ass to grass squat for someone who isn't anatomically set for it at that presently moment, be that flexibility wise, be it calves are weak. But then actually you'll see once they gain some strength there, some proficiency, their squat will improve from that.
Right.
Obviously this is taking a very quick view of things. Obviously there's a lot of reasons why people can't squat deep, and it could just be core stability, or they can't breathe, or they've never done it right. But if it is just general tightness, we can train flexibility and strength at the same time.
There we go. Well, that was another question I was going to ask you. So, so in terms of lifters, what would you say are? I mean, you said that the psoas, rectus femoris, tend to be, and the upper pec tend to be problem areas. What would you recommend for kind of the average lifter who, as you said, only has a certain amount of time to dedicate to their flexibility work to focus on?
Ooh. Okay,
well, that's a bit of a broad question because everyone's different.
Question. So, one, I'd perform the pencil test for the upper body. So if you guys don't know what that is, you grab 2 pencils and just let your arms hang by your side and see if they're massively turned in. If they're massively turned in, then we need to start stretching the pecs. We need to start trying to gain range. A lot of the time, it's not even that we need to get more flexible. We just need to teach the body that we can go into these ranges because we avoid them in our training. So we're thinking opening the chest. You can think, just specifically the powerlifting, we could think, dumbbell flies at a 45-degree angle. That will open this whole fascial chain from the center of the chest to the big finger. And that will, in turn, take it gentle, stretch it out. Don't pump the reps. I know it's a pump, but try go thing. Even if we go back to like old school bodybuilding, like the overhead, not the overhead,
the straight arm pullovers,
pullovers
over the back of a bench.
Yeah, like they're fantastic. I use them a lot with my acrobats to open their bridges and stuff. And it's one of those forgotten things that I don't know, possibly got demonized for some reason back in God knows when. But that's a fantastic movement that also will just get smaller muscles involved as well, but also just stretch everything, get back. These are, just trying to think what else in terms of the lower body. Most people need to work on ankle mobility as well as stability, so controlling it in a stretch position more so than calf tightness. Calf tightness can be a symptom of that, which could in turn mean limited squat depth. They need to gain some proficiency in the 1990 hip squat, or hip position. So if people want to look up, I think Paul Check has a good video on that. You can apply all the loaded stretching principles to that, but just gaining some proficiency in that will open up the piriformis. The hip flexors, once again, as we touched on the rec fem, clearing that out and getting into that posterior tilt of the pelvis and getting away from the anterior tilt.
Okay. So basically, there's a lot of stuff about extension from the hips and from the shoulders, and doing the 45-degree pec fly, which that's something I'm going to need to try. My wall, you'd probably cringe at my wall test. You're standing against the wall trying to slide your wrists up. I can get to about there, and that's it. If you're listening to this on iTunes, that's like slightly above parallel. That's horrendous. So what are some targets that you think the average lifter should kind of work towards in terms of progression with those things?
I think in one of those things that it's a difficult question thing, and I don't really predict flexibility for training because it's so variable. We must be focused on the process more than anything else. Like, say for example, say if you came to me and said, okay, I've got a 120 kilo squat, I'd be fairly confident if you're an average person with no injury and say, okay, we're going to train for 12 weeks, that you'd get anywhere between a 10, 25 kilo increase in your squat. I'd be fairly confident making those predictions.
Wow. So it's not something to overlook then. That's pretty major in terms of percentages.
But in terms of flexibility training, it's so unpredictable. Like, I've had some people apply these loaded things. Like, I'll put girls who've been struggling with their splits for like 2-3 years into full side splits and full front splits in one session. Like, literally, just they've come to me, we've done some stuff, whatever I've done has clearly been exactly what their body needed. Boom, it lets everything go, they're in splits.
Wow.
I could pick a selection of girls who are the same age, height, weight, and experience as these other girls. And we've had to spend a year and a half working on their flexibility to gain their splits, even though they started their stats are the exact same.
Right. So you think is that maybe testimony to the sort of psychological element of flexibility then? Or is it maybe that the girls who got it maybe had the capacity for it, but something was kind of holding them back, and you maybe taking them through?
That's one of the things. It's just that's why I say it's hard to predict, because, like, in terms of if people are carrying a lot of just say tension and not even thing, if you teach them to relax, teach them to breathe into their stretch, suddenly they'll just get a feeling of everything opening up and expanding, and that comes very quickly, and suddenly they have all this new range, and it lasts pretty much once they keep using it. Whereas if people are just chronically tight for, say, their fascia is bound down, then we just need to work on remodeling the tissue, which will come if you follow the process. So for people listening, my goal is just to follow a process, be it I suggested something incredibly simple, which is very simple for people to follow. It is not the best process. I wouldn't say it's the ultimate way to gain it, but it's very simple to apply. And that's what we look for, and you can consistently apply it. And then you can judge the effects for yourself. Now, people, in terms of flexibility training, we have to expect there's a bit of a plateau always, while there's internal remodeling going on. So you'll gain some range, you'll gain some range, you'll gain some range, then it will stop. Now that stops for 4 or 5 weeks. After about 5 weeks, you might want to question what you're doing, but make sure your positions are nice. Maybe start to hold it a bit longer. There's a couple of all the variables you can play with, but just expect that plateau. And when that happens, just let it happen. Don't change anything, because that's the temptation. We're like, oh fuck it, what I was doing wasn't working.
Definitely.
And then you'll change it to something else, and then you'll get a bit more gains because the neurological effect of a new stimulus. But then they'll plateau as well. But if you just focus and work through that plateau, and then suddenly things will open up.
Right, so just focus on the process. I think that's going to be quite a hard mental hurdle to swallow, especially for lifters, in the sense that, where you're expecting, you know all of the inputs and the calories and everything, and so the progress should be relatively linear unless there's something wrong. Whereas as you're saying, if this is kind of a non-linear process, to just focus on the positions and how it feels. And I guess also with the expectation of timelines when you're starting a new pursuit. You mentioned in one of your videos as well that the analogy of someone just turning up in a gym and expecting to squat 200 kilos, whereas there's not really, because there's no reference point, I guess. And the way that I've been trying to learn a pancake stretch, which for everyone listening is where you're sat with your legs straight out at 90 degrees or so, and you're trying to get your body flat on the floor. And I was just doing the standard sort of PE teacher recommendation of 2 to 3 sets of 30-second balls out stretch, and I wasn't getting any more flexible, and it was just hurting. And after sort of 2 weeks, I think, of following your ballistic approach, although ballistic implies that I'm absolutely ramming my head against the floor, it's just sort of gentle bouncing. My progress has improved about 10-20 degrees, which which is fantastic. What are your thoughts on, because you see a lot of one of my friends has asked me to ask this for you, the 45-day wushu protocols and these kind of secretive mobility programs. Just he wanted to know your opinion on these things that are enshrouded in mystery, and is there anything to them, or can we just crack on and dispel the mysticism? I know sort of Kit Lachlan has a very open economy view on the whole thing, and he's just like,
My view is the same as Kit's. So people do have their own specific methods and protocols. It's marketing at the end of the day. They need to have them. They may be effective, they may not. I don't know what is the exact 45-day protocol. It's still shrouded in mystery. I don't have anything to do with it. I've never done any of the seminars, so I can't answer that specifically. I've seen a few of them posted around the net. I don't know if it's which one's the correct one. But I think in terms of, I'm in favour of sharing. I'm in favour of, there should be no gatekeepers to knowledge. I think it should just be out there in public discourse, and then people can make their own decisions. So some stuff, people are kind of, it's one of these things, a lot of times the emperor knows clothes, wears no clothes. Now I could release, or I could start speaking about my secret side split routine that is top secret and only granted to the thing. Now people would want that. Now if you have actually seen what's involved in the side split, it's just me making you do something consistently. Then you're just going to go, oh, there's no real secret to that. Whereas if we have a little bit of mystery, a little bit of exotic mystique, it's the same shit. We're like, think about it. If we go back in the day, people were pretending to be gurus from India or strongmen from India or mysterious performers from the East to build a bit of mystique. We have the secret wushu protocol. It's from the East. It's exotic. It's something we might do.
Therefore, it must be great.
Yeah, same with strength training. Think about all the secret Russian squat program.
Yeah, absolutely.
And like some of them are effective, but a lot of them are just like made up by the Joe Weider crew. So
right.
I think,
well, it's interesting to see that's the same kind of principle in the flexibility and movement world as well, because I think, as you said, with strength programs, and particularly with us, a lot of our content is about trying to dispel the nutritional bollocks that comes about, and it's not as sexy to sell calorie deficit and progressive overload, but
but it works.
Yeah, that's it. So like all of the rest of these diets are really just ways to kind of trick people into following those main principles. So I'm guessing you're saying that these sort of mystic programs are really just following the same fundamental principles, but wrapped up in marketing.
It's it's one of those things. Like the head to toe program I put online was just kind of a bit of a, I'm not going to say waving the flag, but it's just to show that it's not actually too difficult, that other people know these things. This doesn't need to be shrouded in mystery, that we know the principles, all the principles of stretching and flexibility that we're using at the moment have been known since at least the 70s, as far back as some of the literature on this goes, probably even the 60s for some of the stuff I use. It's not revolutionary, it's not novel. Maybe the names and the terminology we use for it, it's what I spoke about in my blog post. I don't know if you read the one released around New Year's. Because movement is new, there's a battle of terminology not practice.
Right.
That where people are trying to vie for market space, and I'm doing it as well. Straight up, I run a business based on this. I love doing it, so hopefully my business grows. But we're battling for terminology. Are we doing loaded progressive stretching? Are we doing modern methods of mobility, which is my seminar? Are we doing functional range conditioning? Are we following stretching scientific? All of these, like if you look at what the actual practices are and what we do in them and what the end goals are and how people reach them, I'm going to say if I gave a program and we put it next to all the other programs for these things, they'd look remarkably similar.
Right.
They would, and there's going to be variance for people, there's going to be variance for people's level. But if we look at the way people progress through them, it'll be the same. Now, it's the same as like if we look at all the 5x5 programs for lifting out there, if we look at, beginners, they're all very successful. They all follow the same principle of progressive overload, consistency, doing a bit more, getting all your other variables in check, what people don't talk about, eating right, people start doing that for the time, sleeping right. If we put them all together, it doesn't matter whether you're doing, strong list 5x5, starting strength, mad cow,
Bill Starr, yeah. So I guess all of that is then attributed to the magic of the program and the specific, the fact that you do squats on the Tuesday and not on the Wednesday afternoon and stuff, whereas actually it's just the combination of a series of lifestyle changes. And
yeah.
I mean, in terms of what you said there, I mean, the as someone outside of that world, the terminology doesn't often mean a lot to me, but seeing the way that you approach it would make me, if anything, more likely to attend one of your seminars, in that it's just sensible application of decent principles rather than having it behind this paywall of magical things that makes you think, well, there's no way to empirically verify whether these are correct or not.
Yeah, that's it's one of those things. It's like when, say, just if I go to my seminars, I've deliberately kept them free of science as much as possible. Now I can do the science, but anyone who wants to do it. But I try to just keep it practice based. I've tried to move myself into just practice based. I'm trying to, like, I spent so long researching. I spent so much reading, so many books, so many courses that I'm kind of sick of it myself. So now I'm just interested in what works in a practice base that I can apply to a lot of people. So that's what I do in the seminar, is like we teach these techniques, we learn them as you go along. So if we're learning how to do ballistic stretching, we're doing ballistic stretches for various body parts. We're talking about how you apply them, but we're also seeing it in action rather than just going, okay, we're going to do this, here's the technique. So then you begin to understand, you put a more practice-based component of it together.
That makes sense. I guess especially in a field of flexibility where the research is slightly more it's slightly less up to date than in strength and nutrition. There has to be a point where you just say, okay, we're just gonna take the heuristic approach and try what works and move that way rather than and even with something as simple, I don't know, with carbohydrates, for example, and you've still got ongoing debates of people that can find any data that is pro or anti something quite fundamental if you look for it. And at the end of the day, you have to say, well, look, just eat some carbs, get on with it, you'll be okay, or don't do it, and then see what works.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a lot of what it comes down to, is just trying everything out in a way that's structured and then finding what works for you from that structure. If you jump from one thing to another, you will never know whether it works for you. You'll never know if it will work for you, then stop working. You'll never know whether it doesn't really start and then suddenly it just exponentially works. You've probably seen this with your diet clients where you're like, okay, they tried whatever, it's just not working. You go, okay, we're just going to stick with this one approach. We're going to do that for 6 to 10 weeks, and then we're going to reassess whether it worked.
And it's not very popular psychologically, but
it's not novel. That's the problem, is people crave novelty. And they just, if you probably released an ebook, jazzed it up on the ultra fast, rapid fat loss, super secret manual, people would be all over that shit. They probably wouldn't follow it or stick to it, but they want to know because it's new, it's sexy, and it's interesting.
That is true.
Hold on,
I'd have to start taking sedatives to get to sleep at night as well for doing that. But yeah. Well, Emmet, it's been amazing chatting to you, and there's a lot of really applicable stuff for lifters there, so thanks for your time. How can we find out more about you and maybe go to one of your seminars?
So basically, I have the website silverleapproject.io. That's perfectly findable. You'll find more information there. It's still just in development, but it's got my blog. Other than that, you can find me on all my social media, Emmet Louis on Facebook, Instagram, and I think that's all I have at the moment. Other than that, there's not that much events planned for the next year coming. There's a few coming up, but they'll be announced on Facebook as events. If facilities are interested in hosting, just get in touch. We can work something out. And other than that, speak to people new, or speak to people in the new year.
Fantastic. I'll stick all those links in the description below. The awkward moment when at the end of an interview you realise you've been mispronouncing the interviewee's last name. But yeah,
okay. There's a few pronunciations of that, so don't worry.
Oh, cool. Well, as you can imagine, my name gets butchered as well, so we're in the same boat. All right, Emmet, thanks so much, and that's episode 24. Check out the links in the description, and speak to you guys soon.